Welcome to Timberborn and the settlement of the Evergreen. My name is Zedek, and I have been on a quest to absolutely terraform everything in this map. And today's episode, I think, is going to be the last of this series. Because you see, we only have this little corner on the side of the map that has not yet been terraformed, and that is what we're going to do today. I'm going to pull out every trick I can, and we're going to reclaim all of this land and get it filled in and looking good. Now, originally my plan for this section was to make it a district of its own, potentially put beavers here or some form of production. At this point, though, I don't think that's necessary. We've got enough going on, and since this is the last episode, I don't really need another district. So the name of the game today is just going to be reclaiming and decorating. Maybe we can have a small village out here that is considered the suburbs of the capital. First thing on my mind is how are we going to be able to get water over here? We do have water, as you can see, coming in through this section and getting here, but it is relatively low level, right? Like, that's not going to help anything to irrigate these cliffs. I do notice I've got this little trench here. I could potentially dig a trench through here, and that would allow me to get water down in the canyon, which I'm going to do if only for the effect. And I think over here, I've got this section closed off. I could let water in here. So that would get most of these lowlands all taken care of. For the highlands up here and here, I think we're going to have to resort to using our pressure system. So if you're just joining in on the last episode of this series, you're in for a surprise, because if I go down to the very bottom of the map, that's how this map is played. It is the pressure map, and so everything works on pressure, and I have a giant network of tunnels down here, which is connecting all of this water all the way up to our central dam. That's what's keeping everything topped off. So we should be able to splice into some of these pipes here, for example, over here, or perhaps somewhere along here, and fill in some of these larger pools. So that's what I'm thinking. I think to start, what I'm going to do is queue up a little bit of work down here to get those pipes ready. And really all I'm doing at this point is, mainly for aesthetic purposes, I'm trying to straighten this stuff out. But I can queue up some of this work and they can be working on it in the background, especially since we have enough planks to be able to afford some of this work. Then as they clean up some of this, I will eventually fill in everything else that we don't need. Now, as for the surface, let's go ahead and get working on these new trenches. The parts I need to be most careful about is any overflowing. So anytime we have a drop in the height, we're going to eventually need to have either sluice gates or floodgates or something taking care of it. And I usually use the equivalent of sluice gates or fill valves. So I'm going to mix it up a bit and add some double floodgates. If I'm going to be using floodgates like that, the only consequence of that is I do need to add some automation to things. Because unlike fill valves, they do not monitor the water downstream built in. But that's pretty easy to do. I can just put down this depth sensor, add it to a set height, and if I click over on these guys, a nice thing that you can do is, when you open this dropdown, you can just click on one of these sensors. Now these guys are linked. And so when that sensor is on, this will go ahead and let some water out. All right, we're just going to go ahead and continue this all the way down. We will eventually have to figure out how to get beavers here, but I'd at least just like these planned out. And we can seal off anything because really, we are not intending any of this to get off the edge of the map. Oh, look at this. I didn't even realize we got a nice stretch of tunnel here. Well, that is going to be tricky because we're going to have to handle any flooding that might cause. Okay, I'll remember that. We'll have to queue up some beaver to get down there, but I don't think I want to flood this all the way to the top. I mean, if I were developing this into its own district, I think this would be really interesting to have a colony built into the edges here. Dynamite this out, add homes in here, and just have a little bit of water in the bottom. But if that was the case, like let's say I just want a little bit of water down there, what we could do is we could build a retaining wall and just dribble out a little bit from the top, right? If we assume that water is going to be up at this height or this pit, we could do something like that. And if that's the case, all we need is some sort of fill valve down here that keeps a target height. All right, easy enough. And I see that this is all connected to this setup too. So if this river is going to come around and flow down here, I guess we're going to have to figure out a nice way to get all these connected. I think this should remain, ultimately. I don't see any reason why I should have water cascade down here. But we can go ahead and replace stuff like that with some actual dirt, and we can plan on some water coming down through here. Now, none of this is ultimately going to be an overflow point for the map. I think the overflow point for everything in the system is still ultimately going to be this stream right here, which is going to come off the map here. So as I'm looking at this, that's why I'm sealing off all these edges. I don't plan on any overflow coming off the edge of the map here. Let's see, for this little run here, I'm just going to straighten it up a bit, and then once that gets destroyed, we can come back here and fill it all in. All right, so that gives us a little bit of run. The other thing I'm going to look at is this run right here. So this looks like another cave system that is going to go off the edge of the map. So we'll plan on it getting sealed off. And that also means we're going to have to regulate the flow of water coming into it, which we can do the exact same way we just did the other side here. Same deal, another fill valve, just setting it to a little bit of height like that. Yes, I think that will work pretty well. Now, this will be an alternative way to get access to water there. So for that end, we will need also a little bit of dynamite planned through here to give access to the river. All right, that is the initial plan. That should give us a good section of all of this green, but beavers can't work on it because they don't have access. So let's go ahead and get that started. One of the things we should count on is having some zipline station access to these points from the capital district. So to that end, let's make a few intersections in here with our zipline stations, and then start having it branch apart in different directions. I have to say, after playing the Folktale for a while, it makes me really miss the Iron Teeth. I think some of the buildings that the Iron Teeth have are just so powerful that it makes it sad to not have it anymore, especially when it comes to zip lines. But in a lot of ways, two ways just make things so much easier that I miss them quite a bit. Right, I think that should do the trick to get started. We've got a lot of zip lines planned through here, and I've got an idea for a rough circuit that we can set up to go through here. But otherwise, that should give us access to most of this territory. And while these things are all planned, there's no way to actually build them. So I'm going to have to do the tedious work of going through here and building, at least for now, temporary roads to each of these starting points. And that is only going to be temporary though, because I think long term what I would like is for a lot of this space to look natural, like a giant forest, other than say a small village town here and there. And so what that's going to mean is eventually removing a lot of these roads once we finish getting it all irrigated. So messy roads go in for now, and eventually will be torn out. While I'm at it, I'm also going to make sure to clear out all the dead trees. We have a nice blank canvas to work with, and we can eventually replace that with the good stuff, with real trees. All right, that is a lot of work queued up. I'm going to give the beavers a moment to catch up with our work queue and get our new transportation network hooked up. Initial building queue is complete. We've got our transportation network more or less set up, which will give us access to everything, as well as our first round of construction done. And we've got our sewer system all nice and pretty now. So I think we're ready to do our initial run of hydration for this area of the map. This isn't going to get everything, but this is going to give us a starting point to look at. We've got a few places to work with. First up, let's get this section hydrated. I think the only thing that's really preventing it is this set of blockages right here. We're going to go ahead and pull these out and see what we're left with. The blockages really do take a lot of time to destroy. I've been eyeing the next map that I'm going to start after this, and I am tempted to do Timberpunk or one of those. They look like just very difficult maps, but with tons of blockages and thorns like this. So I'm curious to see what that will look like. But for this map, here comes the water. Let's go see if our automation works. I think I might have to lower the height when it's open just a bit, maybe to say 1 height. We're also in a good season, so thankfully this isn't going to be too much of a problem. I also realized I put these double floodgates in here. They have no purpose, because this is going to fill up ultimately over here anyways. I love to see all that green space being populated. So this is definitely getting a majority of the lowlands. We are going to have a problem of dealing with all these highlands though. I think we're going to have to use some of the tricks I did elsewhere in this map, where I put underground pipes for them. But we'll get to that in a second. Let's see how the rest of this goes. I'm especially curious on this section. Well, pretty good. A little bit of sloshing in the beginning, but this automation setup actually was a lot smoother than it usually is with sluice gates. So not too bad. I'll take it. Okay, so that's this section taken care of. Let's go take a look at this bottom section. We're 7 days into the good season, so there's no water flowing yet, probably because our big dam is still filling up. But something we should do to kickstart things is add some floodgates over to the end of the map here. And then we can use some floodgates over here. Because ultimately what I would like is these to let water through at, say, like 70% height or something like that. But this is going to be hard-coded to something like 0.6 height. Just a little bit awkward to get there, but we should be able to make it work, especially now that we've got this new connected system. And this is actually perfect timing, because you notice we've got some water coming this direction, and that seems to be a good sign because that's our overflow that's being triggered. So let's go ahead and trigger this and give access to the water down in the canyons now. Now ultimately this isn't going to give us much useful new irrigation. In fact, all of this is already irrigated thanks to the surface water up there. The fact that we're flooding this is more for decoration than anything else. Oh, provided that I actually managed to get the rest of that TNT done. There we go. And that should flood down nicely. I see some of that filling in the bottom of that canyon already. And the bottom of this canyon should be next. As much as I can, I do want green. Okay, that was round 1 taken care of. Now to talk phase 2. What are we going to do for phase 2? Well, we want access to be able to hydrate all these upper areas. One of the things I'm looking at here is I would love to be able to fill up these 2 sections here. If I can make these ponds, this bowl and this bowl, that would potentially give me a way to get water up even higher. Now, this being filled up all the way does have diminishing returns. You can see, even if I were to fill in some of this, that only gives me a maximum height of roughly here, I think. Right, so not a ton of space. That's not going to help me with any of the irrigation up here. I think for that, we are going to need to have some form of pipe over here. And since laying down pipes does take a long time, I think we should get started on that now. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to plan this to be the highest point, and this will be a lake, and then we can have potentially a river or something coming down. So if that is the access point, we should plan on having some run through here to populate that pool. So this TNT right here, it's going to run all the way down to the bottom of the map. We'll have to make multiple runs of that. Then as for over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run some TNT to the bottom of the map and then fill this in with dirt afterwards. Digging with tunnels is a slow process, so I want to minimize how much of this run I need to do with tunnels as I can. But basically we have to dig from here to here with tunnels. So we'll plan on something like this. I believe we already have, thankfully, access to this area, so that should be fine. And I'm going to plan on doing some changes here because these are sluice gates. If I'm going to fill in this bowl, I'm probably going to have to change these up if I want to continue this run under pressure. So if I'm going to be doing construction down here, I'm going to seal it off so when I do that construction, I'm not going to lose everything. And of course, I will cart in a couple of supplies just to make sure that this goes a little bit faster. The TNT went in a lot faster than I thought, so we can go ahead and immediately get rid of that. Way faster to do this than rely on the tunnel system. But now that we're under here, we can go ahead and continue the construction that direction. Super easy. Now all I need to do is cover up the top. Way faster to do that than dig with tunnels and get all the planks in there. While they're working on that, let's go ahead and move on over to the second bowl that we're going to look at. This thing, which currently is where water is running off the edge of the map. I certainly don't want that, but what I think instead what I want is to use this little cave system we've got. You see, this cave system right now is not being used. I got this lake. I could potentially open this up to connect to the lake and dump water out there. But I'm not going to do that. What I would love is for this water to be under pressure. That way, again, I can get this water up even higher than potentially that lake. So what we are going to do to pull that off is we're going to make a plan to splice into this. All right, we're going to connect it right in there. And to pull that off, we are going to have to seal this off so there's no leakage in the beginning, which unfortunately, this is a place that the beavers rarely, if ever, go. You see, this is part of the sewer system that I never modernized. And I don't know if I will, because modernizing the sewer takes a very long time. This is like the forgotten waste down here. So if we seal that off, here's the plan. I'm going to take this, and I'm going to cut off access to all other points in this system, except for here. So that will basically make this run right here under pressure as well. Then I can regulate the outlet in here and raise this up as much as I want. To that end, we also don't need this cave system anymore. It's okay if this gets permanently sealed off from the rest of the world. What I might do is just add a little bit of sluice gates here. That way I can also use this as another system to keep this area topped off. So we can get that segment built. Then as for over here, I'm going to use it to let water out. That way I can keep this section irrigated. But I'm not going to let it actually go down below. So what I'm going to do is just put in a few fill valves right here and just let out a little bit for this stream. And doing that will probably be the last thing that we're going to do. Because in the meantime, we're going to go over here and we'll make sure we have crews inside to actually build that tunnel system. And as for over on this other side, this one's going to be a lot easier. We're going to hook these up to throttling valves. And the reason I'm going to do throttling valves over on this side is I'm going to use that as a way of rate limiting how quickly we're filling in that water. So I'm going to use automation ultimately to control the flow of water into this bowl. All right, continuing that, if we are going to have this bowl be filled up, the next thing that we're going to need to do is seal it off so it doesn't run off the edge of the map. And we're just going to build ourselves a good old-fashioned giant dam to pull this off. We've got tons of logs. Let's just make a giant levee system. When doing this massive construction, I'm going to try not to forget the basics and make sure to haul in all the resources we need. After the last segment, we'll make a little automation sensor and then hook that into the throttling valve. Now, this section is a little interesting. I could turn this into a river connecting these two bowls, because I think they're going to end up at the exact same height. So if I peek through here, you can see the height that I ultimately need it at is up one level. So something like that, right? That would be where the water level is. And really, the only part that is going to prevent me from doing that, I think, is I need to fill in this gap over the mountain range. If I build a little land bridge, I should be able to connect that, and I could just finish off by filling in this last little section here. Then we would just need one final dam to regulate the water coming out. And we're going to do the same thing over here. You see, this dam has to be filled up as well, except it's going to not be quite as high as the other one. I think based on the height of the bowl, that should do the trick. All right, we've got a lot of stuff in our build queue. I'm going to do what I did earlier. We're going to give them some time to build, let them catch up, and then we're going to start filling in this stuff. And while construction is mostly complete, minus this little bridge I queued up, I've got a problem. You see, for the longest time, I've had a big power deficit, which meant that our bot factories rarely operated at 100% efficiency. And now that we have our giant, massive power plant that we built last episode, we've got more power than we could ever possibly need. And that meant our bot factories start running at 100% capacity. The downside with that is we don't actually produce enough fuel for all the bots that we've managed to create. And we now have, well, some riding going on. We've got all these bots with no fuel. And that is just cascading through the rest of the system and slowing everything down. So first off, let me take a look over at our refineries. I think I was smart enough to have our refineries be manned by beavers at least. So they're still running. We still do have a little tiny bit of biofuel coming in. But I think what we're going to need to do is just create more of these. Now, thankfully, I did have this planned in the past. You can see here that in a couple episodes ago, I did carve out this space into the mountain for some extra refineries to be built. So that is exactly what we're going to do. We'll start with at least 4 additional ones. And while I'm at it, I'm going to throw in a couple of extra ones for catalysts, since we always seem to be running out of catalysts as well. I'm going to have to use the first-person mod to explore this afterwards. I'm especially curious about our underground cave system here. Definitely pretty interesting looking. Also makes me really curious to try building a purely underground playthrough. I have to think of what that would look like. Like, maybe I just give myself a ton of TNT at the beginning. All these installed, I see some biofuel being produced, and I see a lot of those bots coming in. This is a pretty big increase to biofuel production, so it should really help. With that, I've gone from rioting bots to just lazy bots. I have way more than I could possibly need. You know, I do have some empty jobs, I think, for bots in some of the districts. I'm just going to go ahead and send at least a couple of them over there. If this game was longer, these would have been the bots that would have headed over to this new district to man. But really, I don't have much planned for it at this point, so... You know, what I'll do, at least, is I do have a few buildings here and there that are still manned, not by bots, but by beavers. I'll just make sure to go over and switch them off as well. Okay, with that mini crisis taken care of, let's get back to filling in these dams. Now, I would like to start with filling in a couple of these, but there are 2 sections we do need to take care of first. And that's mainly going to be sealing off this end of the pipe. Because as soon as I open this up, we're going to have a little bit of a chaos. So what I do remember is I did seal this off here, so I can go ahead and remove these. That's going to let a little bit of water go through, and you can see that this section of the pipe completed all the way to the top. Now we're going to do 2 things here. One, this section of the pipe, I do want to let water out into the dam. And now that we've got automation, creating some of these structures ends up being a lot easier than it used to be. We can get away with a single throttling valve, and we can just seal off everything else. In fact, we could probably just seal these corners off with dirt. And then what we're going to do is just use one of the automation tricks and look for a depth sensor. Stick that one up here, have it trigger whenever the water gets below a certain height, go over to the throttling sensor, hook it up to that. When it's on, we'll let out, say, 1 meter per second, and when it's off, we'll let off nothing. So that takes care of the center. We're going to go over and take care of this section. So for this section, I would like this to fill with water, and then eventually we'll fill in this little pond. For this pond, we're going to take the easy way out, and we're just going to put in, I think, a little fill valve. Nice, happy little fill valve. Fill valves are nice when you don't want to mess around with automation. I do find they're a little finicky in comparison to everything else, just because they sometimes have a delay in letting water out. And as for over here, we're going to be sneaky and we're going to seal this all in with dirt. And I'll repeat the exact same trick with the depth sensor to let water out here. Okay, now we're finally ready to start filling things in. So let's start with this pool. We want this one to go. Now for this one, again, this is connected to this little stretch here. And you can see that I did connect it to the pipe network. The only thing it doesn't have is those levees cleared. So we are going to go down here and we're going to open these up. See what happens. Since this is under pressure, I'm expecting water to just come bursting through that topper level pipe pretty quickly. Just like that. This side should be fairly conservative to let water down into here, so that ideally that's going to get this whole chunk hydrated. And since it's coming down here, these are set with automation. They're going to start filling up that bowl. Excellent. Now, since this is under pressure as well, we might have an opportunity to plug into it here to get water up to the top of the mountain to hydrate this area. This section is probably the highest point that we've got, so we're going to likely have to carve some tunnels through here soon too. But that pipe is rapidly filling everything up here. While that fills up in this side of the bowl, we're going to go over here and we're going to repeat the exact same process over on this side. So again, we've got automation all queued up. We're going to go down here and we're going to destroy this little section here. So two things should be happening right now. One, water is rushing down this pipe to start filling up and going up to the top of this hill. And two, this should be letting water out until the depth sensor gets triggered, which that all looks to be the case. And then the water did reach up here and it filled this up. This looks greener than I think it's really going to be. We're getting a false signal because of some spillage here and this water is keeping things hydrated. We'll likely have to do a little bit of work there later. But as these two fill in, I'm really curious to see what the effect of hydration will be for this corner of the map. Let's take a look. How far have we gotten? Well, pretty good. We do have some high points. We're going to have to use some tunneling for that. I think some of this can also be done with a little bit of TNT, and we still do have this giant mountain. For this mountain, we're going to have to use a couple of tricks. The first one I'm thinking of is what I did over here. I mentioned this in the earlier part of the game, but you'll notice we've got lots of mountaintops over here, and they're all nice and green. And that's because these are all ringed with tunnels of water. And I pulled that off very similar to the technique I used over here when I built that underground pipe, where I dynamite some space up to make the tunnel and then go ahead and covered it with dirt. So I think that's going to be the answer for most of this, especially because, as you can see in this little green mark right here, we've got access to a pipe pretty close. The only area that I'm worried about for this is over here. You notice this part of the mountain is actually an overhang, and there's not a lot of space I would have available to put water underground there. So I think for places like that, we're going to have to resort to using a pond with a pond dump. That's okay, because we have over 233 bots that don't have anything available for them to do. So let's get this started. You can see I'm going to speed it up a little bit, but all I'm doing is laying down the TNT. And I have to put down at least a 2 strong in TNT to get down deep enough for the tunnel. And whenever I have to go down a height, I'm going to use the 3 strong TNT. And this looks very messy while I'm going through the process because I have to cover so much different spots here and there. And unfortunately, this mountain is very tall. It's not every day that I get to blow up a mountain. Now, this mountain looks very odd, but if I have done my planning correctly, when this is filled with water, it should ideally keep everything hydrated. So the only part I haven't planned is how we're going to connect this into the pipe system. And I think for that, we're going to do what we did earlier, and I'm going to temporarily seal this off under the expectation that that's what we're going to do. We're going to plug into this segment right here. So that would mean we're going to have to dig down just a little bit more to get into there. But for everything else that isn't connecting into that pipe, we're going to go ahead and fill in the big giant mess that we've made. Generally, that's just going to involve going through all these places and adding a layer of dirt back on. And anytime there is a dip down to the next level, I have to be careful to make sure that I'm accounting for it and I'm still connecting. And before I start filling in the dirt, I'm going to just spot check that each one of these cases is connected. You can see I could do that with the 3D tool, holding down Alt and the mouse wheel up and down, and I can just spine through each of these layers and make sure I didn't accidentally seal anything off. So everything here looks pretty good. Now we'll just give them a little bit of time to lay down all of that dirt. If I did my planning correctly, everything should be in the right build order. So let's see if that's the case. This structure's looking pretty good. You can see the only thing I've left remaining here are these ponds over here. And I think I'm going to keep it that way because this is going to be a pond that we're going to keep populated there. This will be the only part of the mountain that's not natural looking. But with that being prepped, let's go ahead and splice into the tunnel. I have a feeling we might have to do a round or two of this. Okay, there we are, connected in, and then we can just seal everything off. Now the big test. What is it going to look like when we actually let water in here? So down to the bottom of the map we go, and we're going to delete our temporary gates, and we're going to see what the surface looks like. So I see water immediately getting back up to this little creek. I see it just about to get access to our tunnel system now. And as that kicks in, I should expect it to start expanding as it goes. And I'm really hoping I managed to get everything. I'm seeing a few dead spots, but I'm not sure if that's just because the water hasn't had time to get through everything. For example, this spot right here, it does have some spots that are relatively close here. It might look a little bit better once this fills all the way to the top. You can see it's still running down here and filling things down at the very bottom. I waited a couple days for the good season to come back, and once everything was filled in, we did get full coverage of the mountain. The only part that isn't done yet is this segment, which I still have to do for a manual pump. But that's easy to do. We'll go ahead and add a manual pump here using one of our many bots at our disposal. Once that water goes in, ideally this is going to get everything else. Well, the water's come in a bit and we are still missing just this little tiny segment. It is almost there though. I think if we were to extend this support pond just a little bit, that did the trick. All right, I think this was a pretty big success. Everything here is completely hydrated and we only needed one manual fluid dump, which I'm not above using manual fluid dumps as we reach to the end of the game. So where should we head to next? Well, we've got these ruins here that aren't looking so great. I think I'm going to use another manual fluid dump here as well, rather than mess around with the pipes, and I'm going to put all those 226 bots that we don't have assigned to some work. I'm going to keep the ruins. I'll just destroy a little run of them so I have access to build some retaining walls. That looks good enough to me. Now, zooming out, we've got 2 additional ridges here and here that are dead. I think we're just going to repeat the exact same process that I did for the mountain. I'm going to go through there, lay down some dynamite all the way through these runs, add a pressurized tunnel, and I'm pretty certain that I've already got a pipe somewhere near the top of the ridges where they start anyways, so I can just plug directly into that. Second tunnel system in, we are ready to start filling this up. Now, a few eagle-eyed viewers might have noticed a couple of mishaps as I was doing all this work. First off, this tunnel system over here, it actually cleared all the way down into the tunnel underneath, so I had to patch in some platforms to keep it going. The other thing that happened is you might have noticed a bunch of water coming out when I was doing some dynamite. I was being a little bit fast and loose with some of these connections here. You see, I actually did connect into our existing pipe network all at once. I just sealed it up really quickly and put levees in here. The idea is that when I'm ready to start filling in this, like now, I can just go through here and I can delete these guys. And we should very quickly get to see everything spread out. I'd say that looks pretty good. Now, we still do have a few pockets of dead space left. I'm going to rapid fire these. A couple of these, I think we could just use dynamite to clear up some space. For this pocket with the ruins, I think I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to dig some tunnels underneath the ruins, and I'm going to use that as a pond, and then hook it up to this upper lake. Now, as for this section right here, this one is very tricky to get a pipe to because the tunnel system is right underneath it. I'm just going to use a fluid dump. Some bot can sit here and it can just keep this mountain hydrated. We've also got 2 existing spots in our colony that are dead. This section over here by our windmills, it is very hard and awkward to get to, another fluid dump. And finally, this one back by the arch that I've ignored for a while, why not another fluid dump? All right, that was a ton of work, but I think everything is now fully green. Everything on this map has been irrigated in some fashion. I am very happy with how this all turned out. I'm especially happy with these over here. Hiding the water in the pond underneath the ruins really disguised it, and it worked really well to keep all that irrigated. But we are not done yet, because while we've got everything irrigated, there is a final step, and that is decorating everything here. Because as you see, all this new space we've got looks very boring compared to everything else. Now for this section, as I said, I am not looking at adding a new district or anything like that, or any other new mega structure. I'm going to make this side go mostly wild. So that's going to involve adding a bunch of foresters and planting trees and giving them some time to propagate on their own. The other thing I'm going to do is install a couple small villages here and there. This is purely for aesthetic purposes though, because in a lot of ways, adding the villages over in these other areas is going to hurt me more than it helps me, because I'm not going to have a lot of amenities for the people who eventually move into the suburbs. I'll try to help out a little bit by adding some statues here and there, but really this is just for decorations. And speaking of decorations, I can mix those monuments in different spots throughout here. You'll also notice that as I'm going, I have cleaned up a bunch of the roads, so things look a lot nicer. I've also gotten rid of the roads in a couple spots, but I'm keeping the stairs here and there just to make sure that the foresters can get access to plant everything. Altogether, that gives us a ton of manually planted trees in our queue. I'm going to give them a season or two just to get everything set up and built. And who knows, maybe another season or two on top of that, so that these trees have time to grow up. And with that, I think we're done. It's not completely filled in compared to the older sections, but it is looking pretty solid. We've got some small villages here and there, an extra herbalist hut hidden up in the mountains, a couple of walled-off farms for everybody, and all sorts of hidden decorations everywhere. And one of my favorite minor additions was a bunch of firework launchers scattered throughout everything, so I can do this. With all of that done, that is going to wrap up the settlement of the Evergreen. I hope you guys enjoyed this playthrough. This was definitely one of the harder ones I've done to try to get the entire map terraformed, but I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. We'll have to see what I start next. I'm probably going to be looking at a different map and maybe mixing in some other games into the channel. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up with one final montage. See everything.